Hi everyone. In the last video we covered Microsoft Word basics. We went over the ribbon and an orientation and some very common shortcuts that come up all the time in that program. We're going to have a similar session today, maybe a little bit more complicated, because we are going to move on to Microsoft Excel. And on that topic of shortcuts, it is extremely useful to keep a log of your shortcuts and your quick ways of doing things in all the programs you'll be learning, both as a revision tool and for future work. To help you with that, up the top right you will see, as I press buttons, you'll see what I'm pressing show up on the screen. Just in case I don't mention the particular shortcut that I'm using, or maybe it's one that we've already covered, you can look up there in order to get an idea of what to press. So as we did with Microsoft Word, we're going to start by creating a new file, a new document. In this case, it's called a workbook. So we're going to create a blank workbook. And here we are. It should immediately look very familiar. It's got a lot of similarities to Word and indeed all of the Office package. You can see the ribbons up the top, the home ribbon, the insert ribbon. These look familiar to what we saw in the last video. There are some pretty big differences. You can see the actual workspace looks very different. Instead of just the one blank Word page, we have lots of little squares or rectangles, and these are all called cells. So one of the most important things to get your head around with Excel is the referencing system. So at the moment, if I click on this particular cell here, you can see up the top left that I am in cell A1. A being the column that I'm in, and 1 being the row that I'm currently in. So if I click here, you can see that that's J18. So what advantages does this different layout give us over Microsoft Word? Why would we not just create a table in Word? And that could do the exact same thing as what we're seeing here. Well, Excel is for data. You will usually see numbers in a spreadsheet, so if we put a few numbers down here, we can do all sorts of interesting things with them. As an example, if I want to know what the sum of all these numbers is, it only takes the click of a button, and I did that very quickly intentionally, but that has calculated the sum for me. So what I just did is called a formula. I used one of Excel's inbuilt functions in order to complete a mathematical calculation. There's a lot of different formulas within Excel, and you will be covering them in depth this semester within your complex spreadsheet subject. The first one we'll go through is what I just did, and that is summing up a column of figures. The quickest way to do it is up the top right here. You should see an auto sum button. All you do is make sure you are selected in, at the moment I'm in cell A6. As long as you're at the bottom of a column of numbers, it will work automatically. Hit auto sum, and you can see that it has automatically generated this thing here in cell A6. And what that thing there is a formula. I'm just going to press enter to clear that and to give us our sum, and then I control B in order to bold it. Similar shortcuts to Word. Because what we need to talk about is the structure of a formula, and I'm talking about up here, you can see it says equals, sum, and then this thing here, a range it's called. Alright, so the structure of the formula. I'm just going to go through to the help file for this particular formula. Hit the FX button near the formula bar, choose the formula, and then choose help on this function. And now that I'm here, it gives me a breakdown of all the different arguments of the syntax. Now the syntax is effectively the same word as grammar. So you've got spelling and grammar in the English language. When you are dealing with a formula in Excel, there is also a form of grammar. And the grammar is called the syntax. If you get the syntax wrong, the formula will come up with some sort of error. So you do have to be careful the way you put in a formula. The order of things is quite important, as is the spelling. Now if I hit syntax down the bottom here, I'm going to skip past this little helpful video, though you might want to take the time to watch that. And we can see that the syntax is sum, open bracket, number 1, comma, and then in these square brackets, number 2, comma, dot, 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 close bracket. The sum part of the formula, or the syntax, is called the function. And there are many, many different functions within Microsoft Excel. To find out some of the functions that are frequently used, you can, when you're in Excel, hit the FX button up the top here. And then you can see some of the most common or most recently used functions. You're very likely to see some mathematical ones there, depending on the room at TAFE that you're in. But sum is what we just used. You can get an average. We'll go into if later on. We can get a count of certain cells, how many numbers are within a cell. We can instantly tell the maximum number that's in a range. There's geometry functions, sine here. You'll find cos and tan if you look around. So a whole bunch of different things that you can do. We're sticking with the basics of a sum for the moment. And I'll head back to the syntax just to finish off that. Okay. So, the sum is the function. After that are called the arguments. And depending on the formula you're using, you'll see different arguments. A sum formula is quite simple. It's only numbers, and you choose different numbers to put in. The description of the arguments is always underneath on this page. You've got argument name and description. The only other thing really to mention here is the square brackets indicate that it is optional. You do not need to have that second argument. You can just have number 1 and then close the bracket, and that's the formula finished. Alright, let's try creating this formula manually in Excel. I'm going to select the auto sum that we did before and delete it. And then I'm going to press equals. And if you remember, the next thing that comes within the syntax of this particular formula is the word sum. So I've typed sum there. And then open bracket. Now, if I had forgotten, one of the really handy things about Excel is if I start typing, as long as I put equals first, that tells Excel I'm about to use a formula. If I get the first letter right, it tells me all the different commonly used formulas starting with S. So I can go down and find the one that I want. Sum in this case tells me what it does. It adds all the numbers in a range of cells. 2 clicks on it, and that will start the formula for me. And the only thing left for me to do is the arguments of the syntax. So the first argument, number 1, that's what I'm up to. You can see that it's bolded. That's the next thing I need to put in. So I'm going to click on cell A1 here, and notice how it's actually put the reference in there for me. If I didn't want to click, I could type A1, but most people prefer to click. Now, the next thing in this syntax that it's telling me to do is a comma. So I can press comma here, and now it's saying I should do number 2. So I can click on number 2, comma, number 3, and so on. Finally, when I'm done, I just need to close the bracket, and that is my formula finished. It's calculated 15. Now, that is not the ideal way to do it, guys. There's barely any difference between what I just did and sort of just equals and then A1 plus A2, A3, A4, A5. So I've just used the plus sign there. And that does the same thing. The reason that you want to use the sum function normally is, well, you can auto sum, and that will give you the best way to use this sum function. See how instead of A1, comma, A2, comma, A3, I've got A1 and then a colon and then A5. That's called a range. That represents a range of cells. The way to do that manually, equals sum, open bracket. I'm just going to click and drag my selection around the range of cells that I want to sum up. Close the bracket, press enter. So it's up to you. Do you prefer clicking on auto sum? Do you prefer typing equals sum A1 to A5? People who are very, very good at Excel and people who want to get very, very good at Excel will probably not use auto sum. I'll show you 2 different quick ways of summing up a column now. We're going to use the auto sum function for one of them, and for the other we're going to manually type it. Now, I'll do it once slowly and then once fast. So let's do the way that I personally sum up a column. I would start by typing equals and then sum, open bracket. Now this is very similar to one of the shortcuts we discussed in the Word Basics video, the first video. I would press the up arrow on the keyboard to get to the bottom number here in the column. And then what I could do is I could press Shift and up, 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 up. So I'm holding Shift and I'm pressing up multiple times. That does my selection for me. Now I know from experience I don't actually need to do this closed bracket. I mean, I usually teach doing it, but you don't really need to. I can just press Enter at this point and Excel will automatically put that closed bracket in there for me. Alright, so that was once slow. Now, to speed it up, I type sum, open bracket, up arrow once to get the first selection. Now I'm going to press Control, Shift, and then up. And what that has done is it has intelligently grabbed all of the numbers above the selection that I was currently on. And I can just press Enter. So quickly then, equals sum, open bracket, Control, Shift, up. Alright, now the other way using the AutoSum function is, instead of clicking on AutoSum, people tend to use their keyboard. Now there's a really handy shortcut helper within all of the Microsoft Office packages, and that is just tapping the Alt key on your keyboard. So if I tap that now, you see what changed? I'm going to do it again. There we go. See all these little tooltips popping up over the various ribbons up the top and on the quick access toolbar as well. I'm going to press H next because what I'm trying to get to is this AutoSum button. I'm going to press H, and now I have a lot more different options. The next one I'm looking for is AutoSum, which is a U. And what I'm trying to do at the moment is a sum, and you can see that has S there on it. So I'm just going to press S now. And now that has done the formula for me over here, and I just have to press Enter. So if you do that 100 times a day, can you imagine how quick you would get at it? You start to remember the sequence, so you go Alt, H, U, S. Alt, H, U, S. It becomes very, very quick if it's something that you're doing frequently. Other things you can do is insert rows, which is Alt, H, I, R. You could delete rows, which is Alt, H, D, R. All different sorts of functions. Basically, if you find yourself doing something again and again, it's probably worth the brain space to memorize the sequence for it. Okay, so I'm currently in Book 1, which is the default name for this particular spreadsheet. I have not saved it yet. So to save as, I would press F12 and then I could save that wherever I like. So good idea to do that if you are following along. I'm going to create a new sheet now. Now, a sheet within a workbook, you can create a new one down the bottom here. I'm currently in Sheet 1. If I press the little plus next to it, I end up in Sheet 2. And I can add sheets as much as I like. I can reorder them just by clicking and dragging. I can right-click and I can delete a sheet. I can rename sheets to whatever I like. So it helps with your organization. You can change the color of them if you want to change the tab color. Make them nice and pretty. I'm just going to set up this sheet real quick. And here we go. We have all the staff members for this particular organization in column A, the amount they are paid in dollars per hour, the hours they've worked this week, and in column D we need to calculate the amount of pay they're going to be paid this week. Now, you know that would be hourly rate multiplied by hours worked. So if you find yourself reaching for a calculator, I want you to slap yourself on the wrist and try to get yourself out of that habit. If you are in Excel, you are in a calculator. So I'm in column D2 at the moment. If you'd like to work along with me, just pause the video and type out what I've done here. I'm in column D and row 2. To calculate the pay, well, I need to start with an equals sign. If I'm using a formula, always start with equals. I'm then going to do one of two things. If I don't know what I'm doing and I'm new to Excel, I might type 15 and then multiplied by, which is the little star. You'll find that by pressing Shift 8 or by pressing the little star that's on your numpad over in the right hand side of the keyboard. And then I could type 40. Now that will work. That's going to give me $600, which is what it should be. But instead of typing 15 and 40, I'm going to adhere to the golden rule of Excel. And David's golden rule of Excel is be as lazy as you possibly can be. If we have already typed 15 and 40, we should not be typing it again. And I'll give you a good reason for that later. But just for now, instead of typing 15, I'm going to click it. I've clicked on 15, that's given me a cell reference B2, multiplied by 40. There we go, $600. Now I could do the same thing here for Mark, equals 20 multiplied by 35, and I've just clicked on the references again. But instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is be lazy. I'm going to use something called the fill handle. Now the fill handle is a very useful productivity tool. I'm going to get rid of Mark's pay there, and I'll calculate that again in a second. I've already used a formula here. If I do 2 clicks on it, it gives me a visual representation. I've got the blue one over here multiplied by the red one. The one underneath it, can you see how that's very similar? It's just one row down. Instead of in row 2, we're in row 3. So I've selected my completed formula. Down the bottom right of the cell that I've selected, hopefully you can see a little green square. Just going to zoom in so you definitely can see it using the zoom slider down the bottom right. This thing here, see the little green square there? So if I move my mouse, and you do need to be very precise with this, if I move my mouse over that square, see how it changes to a black cross? Black cross. That means that I am over the fill handle. I'm going to click that and drag it all the way down to the row 7. Isn't that magic? That has taken my formula in row 2 and it has extrapolated the pattern of the formula into row 3 through 7. So I didn't have to manually use any maths, any calculations, it just did it for me. Now, very important, you followed rule 1, which is be lazy. Rule 2 is if you ever use the fill handle, I want you to do 2 clicks, so 2 clicks on any of the ones that you filled. I'm just going to choose row 6, doesn't matter, and then I'm going to check my logic. Oops. Check my logic, make sure that it is doing what I want it to. It's a very good habit to be in. You only need to check one of them, but this is showing that it's doing the hourly rate times the hours worked. So the logic has stayed true. I'm going to show you a situation where if you don't do that, the fill handle can stuff you up. Alright, now here we are. We have the same staff, but everyone's getting paid $15 per hour. We have equality. So let's try to use the same sort of formula that we just did to calculate the pay. Remember, follow rule 1, be lazy. Start with equals 15 multiplied by 40. Enter. Alright, now what we did last time was we clicked on the little green square here and we dragged it down all the way to the bottom. Oh dear, what's happened here? We've got zeros. Certainly shouldn't be 0. 15 times 35 is not 0. So something has gone wrong. Now in this case, I'm going to follow my rule 2, of course, which is double-clicking on one of the things that I filled and having a look to see whether the logic stayed true. Very good exercise this, because it gets your head around what's happening when you use the fill handle. Every time we drag the fill handle down one row, the row reference, the number, for each of these arguments is increasing by 1. So let's have a look at this one here. It's B2 times C2. The next one, B3 times C3. 4, 4, 5, 5, and so on. Now, that's not what we want in this case. We want the blue one to stay up here on the $15 per hour. What you could do is you could mouse over the blue reference here, and you could drag it up to the 15 and let go. And now that's fixed it. It's B2 times C5. And that's worked. It's given me $300 per hour. But it's breaking rule 1. It's not lazy enough. What we need is, when I do this original fill handle drag down, we need it to work. We just want it to all happen at once without any extra effort. So to accomplish it, I'm going to get rid of my mistakes there. Now in this first formula, this is fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but I'm going to think ahead here. The $15, we want that to stay still. Do we want the $40 to stay still? Or do we want it to move down each time? Yeah, we definitely want it to move down each time. So to make something stay still, we need to add little dollar signs before the references that we want to stay still. Now, in this case, well, I'm not going to go into the difference between having a dollar sign here or a dollar sign here. Suffice it to say that if you put a dollar sign before the B, which is the column reference, and before the 2, which is the row reference, it's going to lock that cell in place. No matter which way I autofill, it's going to stay the same. And that's what I want. What that is called is absolute cell referencing. Or you could just think of it as locking a cell in place. Okay, so my formula is still 600. I've got my absolute cell referencing for B2 there. And now when I drag down, it works. Follow rule 2, double check. Yep, it's all staying the same. The blue one has stayed locked in place. Hopefully you're seeing why Excel is an extremely useful tool for accountants. I'm going to leave you with one little thing here. What happens if our people get a pay rise? And I've made a mistake, I've done all this work, but it turns out they should have been paid $17.50 per hour instead of $15. Well, because I've used references, because I've followed rule 1 and I've been nice and lazy, all I need to do is click here, change that to $17.50 and look at column D updating itself. I love Excel. Thank you for watching the video on Excel basics. If you are looking for additional work, additional resources to study, you will be provided them through class homework and during class, but if you're super keen on getting ahead, then my suggestion is to go to the BSB ITU 402 Complex Spreadsheets Connect shell, go to Content, and then under Learning Resources you'll find the Master Product. Now the Master Product has a lot of good sort of basic theory and video demonstrations and some exercises as well on how to use Excel. One of the hardest topics we covered in this video was absolute cell referencing. So if you're looking for some more help on that, this is where you would go. You'd go to Master Product, Develop Linked Spreadsheets, and then Functions and Formulas. And here you'll find a lot of good theory on absolute cell referencing, some exercises on it, lots for you to practice on.